agree with his work. He was a Frenchman who came here about 200 years ago. So early 1800s. We're in the the beginning stages of the country here, and he was fascinated with the difference between the French and the Americans. When he came over here, he said what he saw was Americans seeing problems and then forming some kind of an association to fix the problem. Now, first you might look at that and say, well, sure, as opposed to what? And he said, instead of what he saw in France, everybody just waited for the government to fix it. If the Americans had a problem with sewage or trash collection or whatever, they would form an association, raise whatever funds were necessary, hire the experts and the workers that they needed to take care of the problem. Again, they only thought about the government to provide the military, police, and court system. Everything else, people would just form an association and take care of it. If you think about this, I mean, you could even go so far with the argument to think about maybe even privatizing something like courts. Courts were actually privatized in Scotland, as some of you probably know, for a long time. But again, if you think about how we thought about it in the United States, we basically said we want those three services covered by the government, and we'll take care of everything else by voluntary association. Okay? As opposed to in France, and when de Tocqueville got back to France and wrote about this, he really offended the Frenchmen, because he basically said, well, the Frenchmen just sit around complaining about the sewage problems and the trash collection and this problem and that problem. Why doesn't the government do something about it? And he said, well, while y'all were arguing, the Americans got together and they fixed the problem. It's already fixed. Now, I think what is interesting about that was 200 years ago. What do you think would be de Tocqueville's criticism now if he came back?
Americans and the French.
Yeah. Now he probably feel the same way about the French as he did then. Okay, but now the Americans are following that same thing. Well, there's a problem out there. Why doesn't the government do something about this instead of us forming that voluntary association to do it themselves? Okay, so some founding principles about this, and I think these quotations are really telling. The government is not about eloquence. Now, notice I didn't put this in quotes. You probably know where I'm going here, because I can't remember the exact quote. But George Washington basically said, the government is not about eloquence. The government is about force. But he wasn't against the government. But Washington had enough sense to know, I know the nature of the beast. This is about force. If you let this thing expand into all areas of life, these people have guns. And they're going to tell you how they want it done, as opposed to you having your own liberty to make these decisions yourself. Okay? So keep that in mind, okay? Government, like a fire in a fireplace. That fire is just fine as long as it's under control. Once it spreads to the sofa and the curtains, you're in serious trouble. Okay, you better keep it confined somehow. Now remember, we had a way to do that. It was called the Constitution. But, yeah, whatever happened to that. Actually, at my announcement, I had to get off track for a second. At my announcement speech for running for U.S. Senate on September 17th, we were meeting at a hotel in Greensboro. And some of you probably know Barbara Howe. She's the chair of the Libertarian Party in North Carolina. And during my introduction, this was Constitution Day. This was on September 17th. And she said, I hope you all know it is Constitution Day. And she was holding up a copy of it. And she said, it'd be nice if people in Congress had a copy of this. Unfortunately, they do have a copy of it. He's never read it. Okay, it's not that hard to read. It's only a little book. Okay, the next thing is, now this is Jefferson. Jefferson said, now remember the word secure that I had in quotes earlier? I said I probably wouldn't use the word secure, I'd use protect. But Jefferson said government's sole purpose, the sole purpose, that's all it's for, is to secure our rights. It's not to tell us how to live or how to spend our money, but to secure and protect our rights. Okay, so we've been talking a lot here about, gave you about 22 or 23 minutes of theory and so forth. What I want to talk about now is talk about applying some of these principles, okay? I could talk about the philosophy for hours. I think it's really fascinating. But then we have to come back to the real world and talk about how you would apply this stuff. Some of you probably know Anthony Gregory. Anthony is the editor-in-chief of Ron Paul's Campaign for Liberty. I don't know how many of you get this. It comes out, you get it, Mike, and I think Derek gets this too. Okay, so a couple of you get it. It comes out every day. It has like 3 articles that are just terrific every day. The other day, his name was Adam Murdoch. He's a physician. He was writing about the swine flu. And it was just fascinating because he's actually a physician who knows something about this as well as being a libertarian. So anyway, Anthony is obviously a libertarian like I am. And he came on my Free Markets internet radio show as a guest. And Anthony and I were having a really good discussion. We were talking about the federal government being $11 trillion in debt. That's $38,000 per individual, not per family, per individual, $38,000. And as a side note, I'll put on my CPA cap for a moment. I'm an old CPA. Chief Financial Officer for banking. It's not just 11 trillion. There's actually tens of trillions of off-balance sheet, off-budget items that aren't even on that balance sheet with the 11 trillion. So we're talking 50 to 100 trillion. And forget about what that is. That's each one of us a house. Okay, this is a lot of money. Okay. So anyway, we're having this discussion, and as we're going on, I'm getting more and more upset. And Anthony's talking about this issue and that issue, and I'm fuming. It's 11 trillion. And finally, Anthony says, he said, you know what, Beitler? I don't blame the government. And I thought, what? Wait a minute. We're here to bash the government. And he said, I don't blame the government. He said, I don't blame the politicians. I don't blame the bureaucrats. For once in my life, I was speechless. I didn't know where to go with this. He paused and he said, I blame the American people. Here he was going with this. He said, I blame the American people because the government couldn't get away with this if they refused to put up with it. If they refused to put up with these outrageous interventions, these unconscionable financing schemes, they couldn't get away from. They couldn't get away with it. So basically, we ended up the discussion that day talking in terms of it is the American people's fault because they keep voting for the status quo. That's why they keep getting more things. Okay, so what I want to do with the last 15 minutes I have here is, I should have put the second bullet point up there first. That bullet point that's saying, you are young Americans, and you're going to be paying for all this mess. I guess I should ask you this. How many of you are under the age of 30? Is that everybody? Yeah. Okay, so that's here. On behalf of the baby boomers, I want to apologize for the shameless legacy of debt that we're leaving to you. Now I'm going to say me here, okay? When I'm sitting on the beach somewhere collecting Social Security, you guys are going to be working day and night to try to keep up with the increasing taxes to pay this off. Okay, because keep in mind, with all this debt that we're accumulating, there's only 3 ways to handle it. Some of you are looking at it like, I know what I'm about to say. Yeah, we can borrow more from the Chinese and the other countries. At some point, that's going to run out. Another possibility is we can raise taxes. You can only raise taxes to a point. I mean, we're in the 40% area now. Are we going to continue doing it at 60? At some point, there's a breaking point there. Or the other possibility, which I think is almost the most terrifying, is we just inflate our way up.